One of the weirdest roller coasters I've ever ridden is called Ice Mountain Bobsled and is located in Salem, Oregon at a park called Enchanted Forest. The ride very much resembles an alpine coaster. The manufacturer is Ascot Design, and they went bankrupt after this ride opened back in the 80s. Ice Mountain Bobsled is actually a conversion of a slide. Yeah, you heard this right. So if you look at some of these sections and you're like, wow, why does that kind of resemble a slide? Well, that's why. They decided to stick roller coaster track in the middle of it. That's also why the track is very thin. What makes this ride so interesting though, is because they had to weave this ride in this themed structure, the clearance is extremely low. So to solve it, they put the riders in a plexiglass box. There's no traditional restraint. Up to 3 passengers can just sit in one of these cars. They'll pull down the plexiglass. You got some air holes to breathe, and off you go. So before we go any further, if you suffer from claustrophobia, do not ride this. As for the ride experience though, it's dominantly made up of track that sits at ground level. Enchanted Forest is located on a hill. The entry to the park is at the bottom, and Ice Mountain Bobsled is located at the top. So the track runs right up against the ground almost the entire time. It is about as much of a terrain coaster as it gets. That's why it has to have a lift hill towards the end of the ride to bring you back up. But let's walk through this ride experience here because it is very, very strange. And I wouldn't necessarily say strange in a good way. So after you board your very flimsy box, you climb your lift hill up to the top, max height of 55 feet, and you enter a tunnel. I appreciate the effort made to theme this attraction. When you put the words Ice Mountain in the name, I would certainly hope that there's some ice here and there, and Enchanted Forest definitely delivered on that part. You could think of this ride as Matterhorn, but on a budget. That's kind of the vibe I got. And you know how Matterhorn is very janky, features some rough transitions, you can just tell it's an old ride? Well, all of that definitely carried through on this one, because some of the profiling on these turns is definitely not ideal. There's probably a reason why this is the only roller coaster that Ascot ever made. As you're exiting that tunnel, you start building up a little bit of speed. For the next little bit, we're completely gravity driven, and you're just on the slightest slope, and I wouldn't so much call this a drop as is just a mild descent, but it's where you begin to pick up speed. The fastest you'll go on this ride is only 35 miles per hour, but because you're flying right past the trees, in a way, it feels faster than that. I think also just because of how low you sit on the ground, it really kind of messes with your senses in the same way that like an alpine coaster does. What's kind of cool is that this part, Enchanted Forest, doesn't just ditch all the theming that you saw from the mountain at the top. You're staying in this snow trench down this descent and even through another small tunnel. And there's a couple moments like this on the ride. And let me just say, I was unsure that the ride vehicles were even going to be able to make it through this tunnel. That's how tight it is. So it's a little freaky. But obviously, you make it through just fine. You start to curve to the right, once again, entering in some of this theming. And it's in turns like this that you realize that this track was probably not properly profiled or banked the best it could, because some of these transitions are not comfortable. I think Ice Mountain Bobsled definitely has the potential to knock you around a little bit. It's just a little interesting when you don't have something to hold on to because you're in a literal box. But anyways, here's another moment where you start to build up even more speed because you're hugging the hillside, just dropping lower and lower. This sharp curve is when you pass by some theming, and there's a really janky moment there. You can see it in this POV because I was filming with my GoPro through the plexiglass, and the turn was so aggressive that it completely knocked the GoPro out of the slot that I was filming in. And that's when the mid-course hits in. And to say that this slows down the ride is an understatement. You come to a dead stop, which if the problem is that you're building up too much speed to take the next turn, I wish that they would instead slow you down a little bit, add in a little bit of a trim instead of just grinding to a halt. But you once again start building up more speed. You're banking to the left, level out, go through a little dip. Don't really expect airtime here. This is not an airtime focused ride. Now you're curving to the right and you're entering this kind of wide helix. Again, another moment here in this POV where you can see how this transition was not probably executed the best. That's one of the only uphill moments of the actual ride. Pretty much everything else, you're headed down the mountain. But I think it's pretty cool that you're weaving through all these trees. Especially this park is absolutely beautiful. And so it's cool that they added in an attraction where you really feel like you just go out into the woods. You're way back there. So I can appreciate that. But next up, you hit your second lift hill and you begin your slow climb up. You know, I think for a lot of rides, this is where the final brake run would be. Ice Mountain Bobsled still has a little bit more to go. At this point, you're back up near the top to where the original lift dropped you off. You have a gradual slope into a little airtime hump, once again going through a tunnel that you don't think you're going to be able to make it through. You hit a trim and you feel like it's the final brake run, but you don't really know because you go through one more gradual turn over the park pathway and then come into the station with actually quite a bit of speed, and that's where you come to a final stop. It is all sorts of weird. I think if anything, after riding this, I gained more of an appreciation for alpine coasters. It made me realize just how tough it must be to properly engineer a roller coaster to go down a mountain where you're right up against the ground. And Wiegand just does such an amazing job. And here's an example of one that, well, didn't do it the best. I mean, granted, this is also a lot older. We're coming up on almost its 30th anniversary. But I can't help but think about how much better this ride would be if a different manufacturer built it. I feel like Ice Mountain Bobsled is an example of something that was a good idea, but just wasn't executed the best that it could have. Because let's face it, the whole plexiglass box thing is not ideal. There's a reason why this is the only roller coaster like that. If you want to have cool theming, great, just build it to accommodate for clearance. Which, great job theming this. It actually looks very nice. And layout, you know, it's not bad. It's not that far off from what an alpine coaster would look like. I think the problem just comes in that this is an uncomfortable roller coaster with transitions that just need to be smoothened out. If they had done that, then I would say that you actually really have a fun attraction here. But after riding this for the first time, it very much felt like a one and done for me. I wasn't exactly rushing to get back in line. So for Ice Mountain Bobsled's final score, I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. I didn't hate the attraction, and I can appreciate what it did well, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to ride experience, this is not one that I would consider great. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear down in the comments below, if you've ridden this, what did you think of it? Do you agree with the points I've made? Let me know all that down in the comments below. And if you're new to the channel, I'd love if you could do me a favor and subscribe. We do roller coaster reviews from theme parks all across the world. So thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time.